Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Dynasty Fantasy Football Central podcast. I'm Michael Moore. He's Jonathan Scott. Say hello, Jonathan.
Hey, people.
Today, I think we're going to start our coverage of the AFC and the new faces to look, specifically today with the AFC West. And I think we'll go in order of what we've done before with worst to first because we want to torture ourselves. And who would that mean in the AFC West initially, Jonathan?
It means not only the worst team, but maybe the worst situation at this position in the league. We're starting with the Oakland Raiders, and we're going to look at their quarterback situation. Look at it in tandem because they did make a move in free agency and the draft. So worth addressing both there. Matt Schaub, you ever feel bad for professional athletes? Like you wonder what they did in the past life?
No.
No?
No, I don't.
Maybe that's just me. Get a bigger heart. By all accounts, the guy will know the offense. He will know where people are supposed to be. He'll know what he's supposed to do within the offense. He has no one to throw to. The weapons aren't great. I think his physical skills are declining immensely. I don't think he can avoid a rush anymore. I don't know that he has the arm strength outside the hashes to really drive the ball down the field. I mean, great locker room guy. They didn't pay a ton for him. They'll get out from underneath the contract whenever they want it, and Derek Carr will come in. But Matt Schaub, guys, to begin with anyway, a low-end QB2 or maybe just a bye-week guy is all you should be looking at for him.
I think that's generous, quite honestly. If you figure if most leagues are 12 teams and your quarterback twos mean 24 quarterbacks, I can't say he's within the top 3/4 of the quarterbacks starting now. Can you?
I don't know, man. Once you get to the bottom end of that trash pile, it's all kind of the same.
Okay, so I think we can agree he needs to be avoided, like at all cost, like the plague. He needs to be avoided. So I think it's worthwhile to look at Carr because there's a good chance that Carr plays this year and might even play significantly depending on how bad Schaub starts off. And the knock on Carr, he was drafted in the second, not that far behind Mr. Bridgewater. So, I'm not saying they're close ability-wise, but, draft-wise they were pretty close. So, the knock on Carr is he can't do well with pressure, which in the NFL you're going to see a ton of pressure. These are professional players who are very good at their job, and you're going to see a lot of that. And that was the knock on him in college was, hey, he didn't see a lot of pressure, and when he didn't exactly perform. He's got a good arm. He's got good intangibles, so there's no question about that. But like you said, he's on a not very good team, and he's going to have to make some things happen. And I don't know if he's that guy. Do you?
Man, it's so hard. First of all, it's not a good arm. It's a great arm. It's a top 5 in the league arm from day one.
Fair.
To your point, we had the ability to sort of look at tape of certain prospects before the draft just because it was available, it was out there. And they don't have all 22 for college yet because that's the last market the NCAA is going to exploit after their trial is over. So we're waiting on that. But there was Carr film out there, and you could see exactly what you were talking about, even to the untrained eye. I'm not an expert. You could see the second that he had to look down at people rushing at him, he just freaked out, man. And it wasn't even like a normal, it wasn't like his brother where he would just go into his shell and take the hit. He would just, wires would disconnect. And it was just whatever he could think of to do at the time is just what he did. There's no rhyme or reason to anything. So, I don't know, man. To me, he's worth drafting. He's worth stashing because I think if he does figure it out, the sky's the limit for him because he has everything else. Like you said, intangibles are there. From everything you hear about him anyway, great kid, great guy, already a father. All that stuff you've already heard. And the team, you're getting into a bit of a pickle here, but the team is looking for a leader. That whole team is looking for someone to be like, hey, that's the dude. And they haven't had that in years. And so if he does well, the city, the fans, the players will follow him from day one. It's just it's the fatal flaw. It's like having a point guard that doesn't have floor vision. It's the one thing you're supposed to be able to do is stand in there and take a hit. And I don't know if you can coach that. I really don't.
Well, and here's another thing you got to remember is, look, they've got Reggie McKenzie in the front office. They've got Dennis Allen at coach. another bad year, and both of those guys are probably gone, which means whoever comes in is going to want their own guy at quarterback. I mean, it's very rare that a new regime on a team sticks with what they had before, if what they had before wasn't getting it done. So I don't know. Even if Carr were able to make it out of this year alive, that doesn't guarantee he's going to be the long-term answer. I mean, I don't necessarily see Carr leading them to a magic playoff berth this year and saving all of those people's jobs. So,
No. And
I
your
think
point, you can look at Mike Glennon from last year. Same thing. Had a good rookie season. Thought he played well. New regime came in and was like, you know what? Screw that guy. We want our own guy. Same kind of situation, and that could very well be his future, unfortunately.
Right. So, yeah, I think there's a consensus. Just avoid at all costs. So, who do we got next?
Next is Khalil Mack. Defensive guy, obviously. The value here for him, to me, is where he gets labeled within your league. If he's a defensive lineman, there's huge value there. Because he's one of the few people, I think, that can get the quarterback. He's going to get it quite a bit, but I think he's going to be athletic enough from day one to set the edge in the run game, get tackles in the backfield in the run game, and also cover people when they want to get exotic. If they want to go with a zone blitz scheme and drop him into coverage on tight ends and within 5 to 7 yard ranges in slot receivers, I think he can do that, and he can do that well. If he's a linebacker, you're looking at a Clay Matthews type or an Alden Smith type player who has value, and he's going to be on the field at all times and create havoc. It's just it drops his value because he's a linebacker. It's just unfortunately how it is.
Yeah, and I think he's going to be more a guy that racks up a lot of sacks as opposed to tackles. So if you're in a big play IDP league, I think Mack probably has some pretty good value. But if you're in a more standard, 1 point per tackle type league, that's going to knock him down a little bit. Because, yeah, like you said, I think he's probably in the mold of an Alden Smith where if he does line up at linebacker, his only job is to get to the quarterback at that point. They're just going to line him up and tell him to go. So, yeah, I don't think he's necessarily a game changer on IDP formats or leagues or teams or anything like that. I mean, I think he'll probably be one of those guys that has a lot more value in the real NFL than in any sort of fantasy league imaginable. So. Yeah,
and I think if you're doing a draft this year, I think between rounds 4 and 6, I think is relatively fair for him. Because I think the high end output for him is a 15+ sack guy a year, and if you get 4 to 5 sacks or points per sack in your league, that's still a guy you start every week and can win you a game or two. Especially considering, again, there's only really one above average offensive line in that division in my mind. And Kansas City's not bad. They're probably above average too, but there will be an opportunity to get after the quarterback in that division, and if he takes advantage of it, I think he's a guy worth at least maybe as your 4th or 5th linebacker, holding on to and seeing what he does in the first few weeks.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that.
So, but yeah, for real Raider fans, for as much as we hate your quarterback situation, Khalil Mack, you're going to love him in real life. Dude is the truth, but just in this realm,
he would be worthy of a jersey, in my opinion, if I were a Raider fan. So
and that's about as high praise you can get from Michael Moore. So
he does. That's the gold standard. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
although you have a Matthew Stafford jersey, so maybe not. I don't know.
Hey, that fantasy team was an all-time team, so I don't want to hear it. Anyway, what do we got?
I'm intrigued to hear your opinion on this because we haven't talked about this before we started. Maurice Jones-Drew. I want to hear what you have to say with this before I talk about it.
Oh, man. I think it's one of those. I think it's kind of like a Chris Johnson in New York type deal, or a LaDainian Tomlinson when he went to the Jets type deal, where they're essentially hoping to get a glimmer of the talent and ability he showed before, and I don't know that it's there, quite honestly. I mean, I think I mean, in fairness, Tomlinson had, I think, 1 or 2 decent years in New York. I mean, he was never another 1,500-yard guy, but he did perform pretty well. I mean, he had a pretty decent yards per carry there, and he caught a lot of balls too, which I think they probably envisioned for Jones-Drew playing beside Darren McFadden there. So, I think he's probably going to have a decent value in redraft leagues, but for dynasty leagues, I think it's one of those like, look, if you catch lightning in a bottle this year, great. Trade him as soon as humanly possible and get something. You know what I mean?
Sure. So really quick, fun game. How old do you think he is?
29.
Exactly. Okay.
Nice.
Now,
All
how
right.
many seasons since he's been in the league do you think he's had over 300 carries?
2.
Also exactly correct. He's only had 2 seasons in his career
Wow.
where he's had over 300 carries. Now, touches are involved too because he does, catch between 30 and 60 balls in the high end on a year. But still, we're talking about a guy who's not 30 yet, okay? Who does catch out of the backfield, so he doesn't have to come off the field at all on third down. He can produce in a PPR league, especially. I think I'm a little more optimistic about this guy than I am. Look, Run DMC, McFadden, I don't know if he's worthy of a nickname anymore. Darren McFadden is, at this point, just a guy. They know that. He knows that. I don't think he's the starter. I think he's just a random dude they put back there in 2-back sets and on third down when Jones gets tired. I think Jones-Drew is going to be the guy here. And if he is, like, I wouldn't be shocked to see him have like an 1,100-yard, 8 TD type of year. I really wouldn't.
Wow, really?
Yeah, I really do.
Wow. That stuns me, quite honestly.
It just depends on whether or not you think last year was it. Like, was that the beginning of the absolute end? Up until that point, he was averaging 4.7, 4.8 yards a carry in seasons prior. He didn't really miss time ever. I don't know, man. Like, it's really hard for me to. People are going after this secondary market for aging running backs right now, and they seem to be going after like the Chris Johnsons or the Frank Gores or these people
Right.
before they even get to Jones-Drew. I guess my thing to people, I would see him as a high-end running back 2 in a league, maybe even a low-end 1 on the high end for him. And if you're trying to target someone for a quick fix for a year or two, I'd be going after him over all these other guys we're talking about.
Well, okay, so a couple things. I think I would agree with the quick fix assessment. I don't think, look, I don't think he's going to be like a 3-yard per carry guy this year. I agree with that. I think there's probably got something left in the tank.
Yeah.
And to your point, he only has to beat out Darren McFadden, who cannot stay healthy to save his life.
Yeah.
And he's in a pretty, the word that's coming to my mind is flimsy division as far as defenses go. Meaning, it's like the Wild West out there.
Sure.
Literally. No pun intended. So, now I think 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns is insane, personally. Now, do I think he could get 1,000 total yards rushing receiving? Yeah, I think that's very possible. But look, it goes back to what we talked about with the quarterback position, which is, look, if they know that, hey, if they're gonna challenge the Matt Schaubs of the world to beat them, meaning opposing defenses, they're gonna hover around who's ever running the ball like a mother, and that, to me, that would concern me. That look, Maurice Jones-Drew, even if you are taking the optimistic point of view, is the best guy on that team, or the best guy in that offense, which means they're going to go after him. So, yeah, I think we're probably in opposite camps on this one, man. Like, I will, if I draft him, I will be sure to call you and let you know, so you can have first crack at it. Believe me.
Yeah.
And look, we may do one of our patented Ridley for Sproles trades midway through the year. Who knows? So
that was a cracker of a trade.
You ended up winning with Ridley long term. So yeah. So anyway, so I think we've tortured ourselves enough with the Raiders. Who do we have next?
Your San Diego Superchargers.
Oh, okay.
We're gonna. Yeah, I don't know why you wanted to move on from the Raiders so quickly. Now we got to go to the Chargers, but
right. Well, okay. So let's recap. They had a surprisingly good year. They made the playoffs.
Sure.
I think you can probably attest some of that to a Phillip Rivers revival a little bit.
Okay.
Along with, I honestly believe, finally having, not finally, but finding a solution to fill Vincent Jackson's shoes and Keenan Allen. They look, I mean, they operate well when they have another receiver there to take some of the load off of their running backs and tight ends. I mean, they're a running back tight end team, but if you had a receiver to take some of that load off, like they did last year, that opens things up a little bit. So, look, I think they're a good team. I think they've got a good core there. And because of that, like you alluded to, there wasn't that many impact free agents or rookies they drafted because, quite frankly, they didn't need a whole lot in those departments.
They needed that. So. I'd say that. I mean, that's a pretty good summation. For the record, since we can't really talk about it because he was drafted last year, I think Keenan Allen's a top 5 receiver in the league. Like, I put him in that A.J. Green, Dennis Bryant category of receiver. I love the kid. Love him. And
I would, I might not go top 5. I would most likely go top 10. And I'll fully admit, he was not a guy I was high on last year. But, in hindsight, obviously, I should have been. Because I remember the only real knock on him was a knee injury that he suffered late in his college career. I mean, that was literally the only thing that dropped him out of the first round last year. So, I say all that to say, I mean, there's several guys this year that are similar, where they, maybe suffered an injury late in the year. I don't know. Who's a guy that suffered an injury late in his college career that dropped because of it this year?
Oh, man, you're going to put me in the spot like that?
Yeah.
I mean, so we're going to talk about him a little bit later, but not a guy necessarily that was injured, but a guy that was openly banged up, hurt, borderline injured going into the combine was D'Anthony Thomas, running back from Oregon. And he's supposed to be this incredible speed guy, ran incredibly slow, and so that dropped him down boards a little bit, drafted in the 3rd, just like Keenan Allen was, and sort of the same kind of thing. The only knock on him was, listen, you're supposed to be fast and you're not, so what are you? Well, he's hurt, so of course he's not going to run quickly, but receiver-wise, I can't really think off the top of my head.
Well, so the point is, if I think that's definitely something you can get pretty good value in rookie drafts for. Because I remember in our rookie draft, I'm pretty sure Keenan Allen wasn't drafted until maybe the 3rd round there too.
Correct.
Anyway, so with the Chargers though, who do we have that we will look at?
So a fun anecdote real quick, and I was telling you about it before we started doing this, and you haven't looked it up yet. But so Donald Brown is going to the Chargers. By all accounts, seems like a really hard worker, competent running back. Doesn't really do anything that explosive. Was better than Trent Richardson last year, so kudos to him. But you will also hear him referred to on this podcast as "Goddamn it, Donald." If anybody wants to go to the YouTube and look up that exact phrase, you'll see a video of Peyton Manning cursing him out for blowing a blitz pickup, and it's the exact reason why he doesn't play numerous downs in the NFL, because he has issues doing all these little things that put his other teammates like out to dry, basically. And it's just one of the funniest things I've ever seen on the NFL mics when they mic people up. Just you see the actual complications of when one guy doesn't do his job, everyone else is just screwed. So it's pretty funny, but I mean, Donald Brown, like you said, not going to get a lot of touches. He's just a guy.
Well, it was really probably one of the more surprising moves in free agency. Not a knock necessarily on his talent, but for a team that already had Ryan Matthews in the 1st and 2nd down role, Danny Woodhead, who they signed last year for sort of the passing down role, and quite honestly was pretty effective. It just seemed odd that they add another guy that might fill that 3rd down role when they already had somebody. And given it's not like they spent a lot of money, I think it was a 3-year, $10 million deal. So they're not going to be handicapped by this deal. But yeah, I think and given we're in late June, so we still have a lot of time to see how things shake out and how they're going to use both guys. But it's one of those where I'm pretty close to avoiding both Woodhead and Brown for that very reason. Is I have no idea what to expect, and I don't really want to find out. Quite honestly, I still think I'm still a big Matthews fan, and looking at sort of behind the numbers, not just his rushing yards and touchdowns. Ryan Matthews to me is very good. He is a top 10 running back in the league in fantasy. So I don't think this affects him a whole lot. I don't think Donald Brown is suddenly going to start taking carries away from Ryan Matthews, but I think
Brown doesn't think he's taking carries away from Ryan Matthews.
Right. Fair enough. So I would probably avoid at least, now I've reserved the right to change that when we get closer to the season, and maybe Danny Woodhead just falls on his face and Donald Brown is lighting him up. I don't know, but for right now, I think you can safely avoid.
Yes, at all costs.
Yeah.
The one other guy worth looking at in the Chargers is Malcolm Floyd, receiver. There's not a lot to say here other than what you've had in the past is what you'll get again. I think he's a decent number 2. As long as the neck injury checks out, which from all accounts so far it has, he should be a really good fit in that offense. I think he's still going to be the 3rd or even 4th option behind Woodhead when the offense is running. But in that offense with Phillip Rivers, that's not a bad option to be. I would compare it a lot to, and we sort of called this out in our coaching preview when we first launched the website, with Donnie Avery with the Chiefs. I specifically said look for Donnie Avery as someone that maybe every once in a while when the offense bogs down a little bit to get behind the defense, get a big play, because he's going to draw the 3rd or 4th coverage option on another team. And I think he's talented enough to beat that guy over and over again. So, he's sort of a 5th receiver kind of guy, someone you stash on your bench and you break in case of emergency. But if he's your 5th receiver, I'd say you're probably doing okay. There's nothing to be ashamed of there.
Yeah, and we should clarify we're covering him because he didn't play at all last year. I mean, he appeared in 2 games, and I think San Diego really struggled to find someone opposite Keenan Allen that was reliable. I mean, they had a couple guys that they tried. I mean, I remember, who was it that I had that? Oh, Vincent Brown was there for a couple games. Bless you, by the way.
Thanks.
Yeah, and it's just it's sort of like I alluded to before with Allen. They really missed, I think, Vincent Jackson and having that sort of vertical threat, and I think it works a lot better for them if they have that. So
Agreed.
Yeah, I'd agree with everything you said. I think Floyd, could be decent. Keenan Allen went down for some reason. Suddenly Malcolm Floyd has some pretty decent value. So yeah, I think we've covered him more than probably anyone else will ever.
You're welcome, Malcolm. You're welcome.
All right, so moving on to the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yes.
Another, I was going to say surprise team, but I think we both agree. I mean, we went in last year thinking, hey, they might be pretty decent. Now they gave Denver, I think, a run for the money for the division, which I don't think any of us saw, but they still had a very good year, and I want to say they sort of filled the 49ers template from years past, who, not surprisingly, with Alex Smith, essentially played just played to not turn the ball over, essentially, and they did very well with that. Not to mention, look, you've got probably one of the best, if not the best, running backs in football and fantasy and dynasty, whatever you want to call it, in Jamal Charles. So when you've got a guy like that and a quarterback that doesn't turn the ball over, good things are going to happen. That's just how it is. And they've had a very good defense as well, and they had a very good one last year. Justin Houston was very good. I mean, he had a pretty good stretch there where he was just on fire. They've got Eric Berry, who's a top 5 safety, whether you're in the NFL or Dynasty League. So overall, they're a pretty good team, and sort of like I mentioned with the Chargers, they're one of those teams that didn't necessarily need a lot of impact players at the positions we're going to look at. I mean, you could argue receivers been lacking in depth for a while, but they didn't really address that this offseason. So who do we have, Jonathan, that needs to be covered that we need to look at?
So we'll start with a guy I already mentioned earlier in the podcast, DeAnthony Thomas, out of Oregon. And so I'm going to go more to your point, what you just talked about. Like, this offense is not explosive. They're a low turnover offense. And I hear people talk about, like, drafting someone like Thomas, or they need to get a receiver outside to open up the offense. But here's the thing. This is an Alex Smith run offense, so there's just going to be built-in limitations with what it is you can do in the offense. And one of the things you can't do, really, is open it up and push the ball downfield. I probably like Smith more than most people, but when you get a DeAnthony Thomas, it's just to fill the McCluster role, and that's it.
Right.
And the McCluster role wasn't really a high-impact role last year. They looked for him for a little bit, but it was all within a 10-yard of the line of scrimmage kind of area. They weren't trying to match him up one-on-one with a safety in the slot or like that and push the ball downfield. So I think DeAnthony Thomas is a guy. He's interesting in the sense to have he's never going to be the backup to Jamal Charles. If Jamal Charles goes down, you're not giving him the ball 20 times and telling him, hey, go win us a game. Just never going to happen. So there's a certain ceiling to what he can do in an offense on a game-by-game basis. But the other thing to say here, if he gets return responsibility and your league gets points for return yardage and touchdowns, maybe that adds a little bit more value than your typical third running back would. So,
yeah, I'd agree with that. Another guy, he reminds me of LaMichael James when he came out, also out of Oregon, where speed guy and didn't really have a defined role going in. Like you said, he does one thing and one thing well, and that is runs fast. So, I struggle to draft a guy like that, for me anyway, because I'm and you know this just because you've played in fantasy leagues with me for 10 years now, but I like very organized and very defined roles and all that. I am definitely not one of those guys that goes for the upside. I'm more of I look at their floor rather than their ceiling, right?
Yeah.
So, and with Thomas, for me, it's a guy that I probably wouldn't even draft later in rounds. He just doesn't have a place for me, quite honestly.
Okay.
Now, and I agree with your assessment. He's going to be filling that McCluster role, which McCluster, to give him credit, did quite well. But to your point, don't draft DeAnthony Thomas thinking, hey, I've got Jamal Charles and need his handcuff. No, that's going to be Niall Davis. And no matter what you think about Niall Davis, which I don't know that any of us think anything good, it's not like DeAnthony Thomas is going to take over anytime soon. So.
Yeah, the Niall Davis thing is fascinating to me, but that's a whole other issue.
Wow. And that was, I remember last year that was a perfect case of he's not good, but he's entering a good situation. So yeah, I'll draft him.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone should draft him thinking, oh, he's going to bust out, because he is.
Yeah.
But
Agreed.
Anyway, so let's move over to defense and the Chiefs' first-round pick in D. Ford. Played defensive end at Auburn, probably going to be converted to an outside linebacker with Kansas City. Kind of fell a little bit. I think he was probably rated higher early in the draft season. I'm not going to say necessarily top 10, but he was definitely getting top 15 consideration. And while still drafted in the first round, I think a lot of people viewed him as sliding a little bit. So, Jonathan, I know you have some thoughts on him. What do you got?
I hate him.
Fair enough.
So even when this draft pick happened, I didn't get it. I heard all the buzz about him going in the top 15 in the first round. I just never saw it. You may see, for those that are watching on video, you'll see above my finger that giant T right there. Right there. That's for Tennessee. So I watch an abnormally large amount of SEC football. And watching Auburn and watching D. Ford, he can do one thing. He does one thing really, really well, and it's just edge rushing. And he struggled, although tried to set the edge in the run game. He tried to gap fit. He tried to go out in the coverage. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't do any of those well, man. And he may be an edge rusher, but he's still not going to start because he's going to be behind Hulley and Thomas or Justin Houston for me to begin with. So he's not going to start, for one. If he is only a speed rusher and that's it, I don't know how he succeeds in the NFL other than getting 6 to 8 sacks a year. And if he's going to be a linebacker, a guy that gets 30 tackles and 6 sacks a year isn't worth drafting. He's not worth having on your roster. So if he can gain weight and somehow still maintain his ability to get the edge on tackles, then it's a different story. I don't think he can. And to be honest, for me, I'm not drafting him. I don't think he's draftable in the current role he's in. Maybe you feel differently, but I just don't see it. I never did.
Well, I agree with everything you said. He's not going to start this year. He's stuck behind Hulley and Houston. Now, for those that have exceptionally deep rosters, meaning you can stash a lot of players, I think he's a guy worth considering because I'm not convinced Justin Houston is going to end up there long term. He's already sort of doing a semi-holdout right now. And, look, he's demanding a lot of money. And quite honestly, I'm not so sure the Chiefs are going to be willing to pony up on that. And I think they probably are sort of preparing for the worst on that. That's why they drafted Ford. So, as far as skill goes, like you said, he does one thing very well. But There's a question on if that will translate well to the NFL and he can do it just as good there. If he can, or if he can show the slightest bit of what he did at Auburn, you're going to have a guy that is in an offense that's very conducive to what he does, as evidenced by Justin Houston going off last year. So, and that's not to say he's another Justin Houston. I mean, I think they're two completely different players. But if Justin Houston leaves next year, then suddenly you've got D Ford starting. So, like I said, I think if you're in one of those leagues that has a lot of roster spots available, or even a taxi squad, I think Ford is probably best suited for that. I agree with you though. Don't look for him to get double-digit sacks this year. I think a guy like Khalil Mack probably will right off the bat. Ford is not that. So while I don't hate him quite as much as you do, I think we're probably on the same page there with him.
And for the record, I'm willing to eat crow on this because by all accounts, all my friends that went to Auburn that still go there, I talked to. Apparently, he's a really good kid. He's a really good guy. I hope he does well.
Well,
I don't see it though.
Let's clarify. We never are knocking their character or their hey, he doesn't do charity work, so he's a piece of shit. So
there's a couple people where I openly cheer against them because they're horrible people.
Well, then we'll cover that.
You guys guess who they are, but
well, that'll be a fun game. But okay. So I think for the Chiefs, for me, actually. And I'm going to go sort of impromptu here. I apologize. But one guy I think that we do need to mention who didn't play last year is Travis Kelce, the tight end. He was a rookie heading into last year and didn't play a snap due to, I think it was microfracture surgery. And is, by all accounts, doing quite well this year and is supposed to be starting off the bat. And, I made the comparison to the 49ers with the Chiefs last year. I think Kelce could fill sort of the Vernon Davis type role. I mean, let's face it, there are no other targets there after Jamal Charles, and you could even argue he might be ahead of Dwayne Bowe by season's end as far as priority goes. So that's another guy who I think a lot of people are probably sleeping on this year, especially with the influx of rookie tight ends that are getting drafted. He's a guy I think that's probably being forgotten or dropped down, especially if you're in your startup league. That I think could provide pretty good value. I mean, what do you think? Like I said, this is sort of off the cuff, so I'm hitting you up front. But, he's a guy that I want to say last year, and correct me if I'm wrong, was like the second or third highest rated rookie tight end going into rookie drafts.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
He was very well thought of, very highly thought of. And I think it was more because of the situation than anything else.
Sure.
To your point about Dwayne Bowe, that's pretty accurate. Like, Dwayne Bowe is basically a glorified tight end now, almost in that Marcus Colston kind of role. And there really was no one to fill that role for tight end for the entire year for the Chiefs. I think he would be an interesting guy. If you held on to him for a year and you're able to put him on IR and you were holding on to him, I think he's a starter from day one. I know he's not available in our league. I can't imagine he's available in other dynasty leagues. And if he is, I'd go get him because he's going to be somebody that can at least, with his frame and his catching ability, can stretch the field intermediately between 10 to 12, 15 yards, box someone out, and move the chains for you. He's not explosive at all. But he's kind of what that offense needs. He is someone that's a very good inline blocker with good hands that can move the chains when needed to, and you can depend on him to do a lot of the stuff Alex Smith likes. So I think it's a good fit, and I think it's why he was so highly thought of to begin with, is because the fit with Alex Smith in that offense.
Yeah. So I would definitely hit up whoever has him in your leagues and see if you can get him, for a pretty good price. I mean, I will probably end up doing that just to gauge the feeling of his owner in our dynasty leagues, quite honestly. I mean, because it may be a case of, I can't keep him, or I've got too many players, or what have you. So anyway,
also,
I know we
went an awesome, glorious beard, and if you appreciate beards like I do, man, he's fun to cheer for.
Is that because you cannot grow one yourself?
That's the exact reason.
Fair enough. And believe me, I have no room to talk. I mean, look at this. So
I'm not even offended. I can't do it.
I know.
I just keep growing.
I know. All right. So was that? I think that was it for the Chiefs, was it not?
Well, quickly, and I don't know there's a whole lot to say here other than we have Aaron Murray on the list.
Yeah.
Just pay attention to Aaron Murray when it relates to the Alex Smith contract situation. If Alex Smith doesn't get a contract re-signed, they let him go to the open market. or they decide they can't get it done and they trade him. Aaron Murray, I think, is someone they'll look at because he is their guy. That's someone they actually drafted. Other than that, he's a career backup. Maybe he'll start for a little bit. I compare him a little bit to Kyle Orton, who coaches will love him because they can trust him. He'll know the offense in and out, where everyone goes. The physical skills are lacking, but, he's just a guy to me. And he's worth a look if you have Smith on your roster already, and he's worth a look if you hear that contract situation just can't be worked out.
Yeah, well, and, sort of touching on something we talked about before, though, he's a guy that dropped in the NFL draft thanks to an injury suffered in college. Pretty catastrophic. I think it was ACL injury and MCL maybe. But either way, that's another guy who, had he not been injured, would have been drafted a lot higher and probably would have had a lot more attention going into rookie drafts. And, yeah, everything you said was correct. He enters, quite honestly, for a rookie, a pretty decent situation. I mean, he's got a quarterback who, ahead of him, who's not necessarily going to be there for 10 years like some other guys, or even 5 years, or even 1 year. So, and look, I think Andy Reid bought himself or earned himself enough capital this year where even if they struggle this year, they're not necessarily going to can Reid. I mean, he's got a couple years in Kansas City now. And, yeah, like you said, he was drafted by them, by that regime, and he could very well be the guy if Alex Smith doesn't work out. So, yeah, if you've got Alex Smith as your quarterback too, I think a guy like Murray is definitely a guy you need to get.
Correct. I would compare it to the Case Keenum situation last year with Matt Schaub. Same kind of thing.
And we all know how that worked out.
Gloriously for everyone involved.
All right, last but certainly not least, your division winners and Super Bowl participant Denver Broncos, which surprisingly, we've touched on some teams that didn't add a whole lot of impact players at the skill positions. They kind of did. I mean, even though they were running at, on all cylinders last year, they added some guys that, for fantasy purposes, are pretty exciting. So I think the obvious one is Cody Latimer, the receiver out of Indiana. Rookie who, sort of what we touched on with other teams, enters a pretty decent situation, actually, where he's got a very good quarterback, obviously, at the helm in Peyton Manning. But more importantly, he's got guys ahead of him who are not guaranteed to be there as early as next year. I mean, Wes Welker's a free agent after this year. I don't know of any pundits or reporters that are expecting them to re-sign Welker. So you've already got one person, sort of crossed off your list ahead of them. They did sign Emmanuel Sanders this year to a free agent contract, who we will, I think, cover in a little bit. That's another one that we'll go off the script for. But then, and look, I'm not going to say Demaryius Thomas is not going to be there because I just don't see a scenario where he's not. But let's face it, if any team can make things work with Peyton Manning and like receiver X over here, it's going to be Denver. So that's why I think a lot of people are probably high on Latimer. He's a big guy. He's 6'2". He's 220 is what we looked up.
Yeah.
What was most impressive for me were his hands. I mean, his hands were excellent last year. He had one drop in 119 targets, which if you're in a Peyton Manning offense, that is essentially like the only thing you need to know how to do, and he will find you the ball. So I think Latimer is a guy that for some may sneak into first rounds in some rookie drafts, depending on how you value receivers. And I think he's probably going to be very good. He sort of is, for me, a good comp to, say, a Jordan Matthews, where, good physical tools, enters a good situation. Maybe not the starter from day one, but it's very possible he's the starter next year.
So I love everything about the guy, to be honest. I'll take it a step further. I think he's their third receiver. I think he's better than Emmanuel Sanders already. And I think we will see that as training camp progresses and the season progresses. I also think for someone that's a bit raw like him, where he was in a Big Ten offense, which that in itself is kind of an oxymoron.
A Big Ten passing offense anyway.
Sure. He's going to have a bit of development to do, and there's no better person to develop correctly and get an immediate return than, I think, Peyton Manning. To your point also, if you're looking towards the future, this would be a great situation 2 years down the road if he does develop properly and Peyton Manning plays another year. Wes Welker is going to be gone. They're not going to re-sign him, I don't think, because the money's got to go elsewhere. Emmanuel Sanders, I believe, was signed. Wasn't he a one-year deal? And that was it?
No, he got a couple years.
Did he? Okay. And even if that's the case, I still see him ahead of him anyway. You're right. Demaryius Thomas isn't going anywhere. But I also see them being much more comfortable that if Julian Thomas can't stay healthy again, going to these four wide sets and him playing a pretty big role in those four wide offenses, because I think he's going to be able to manhandle a lot of press coverage and early coverage in the NFL, and because of his hands, he'll be able to have an impact immediately. They're going to leave him with a simple route tree to begin with, I think. They're not going to overload him with option routes and things that Wes Welker and even Julian Thomas to a certain point got away with last year. But I think he's good enough in raw ability to take that simple route tree and exploit third cornerbacks and second safeties and make some pretty big plays.
Yeah, and just for the record, Emmanuel Sanders signed a 3-year, $15 million deal. So not exactly long-term, but he's, I don't think, going to be cut next year. But, yeah, I think Latimer is probably a guy that's going to get a ton of hype heading into rookie drafts, and probably rightfully so, quite honestly. So
yeah, it's hard for me to find a wart in his game other than he chose to go to school at Indiana. So.
That may not have been his choice. We don't know.
Maybe not.
So okay, so let's go off script a little bit again with Emmanuel Sanders. He was brought in as a free agent for Pittsburgh, sort of to fill that sort of Eric Decker. Well, I shouldn't say that. Him and Eric Decker are not the same players.
No, that's Cody Latimer.
Right. I would probably say they signed Emmanuel Sanders probably, they may never admit this, but probably to upgrade the Welker role. Would you agree with that?
I would agree.
So I think Sanders is going to be a guy that they're going to line up in the slot a lot. He's going to have a lot of under routes. I mean, he's going to catch a ton of balls, 5 yards and in, quite honestly. So as far as PPR leagues, I think he's going to be – I think he's going to be a stud. I think he could be a wide receiver 1 for this year and even next year possibly. And then depending on how things go beyond that. But, yeah, for me, I know this is where we sort of differ. I'm a Sanders fan, personally.
I think he's good. I don't have anything against him. I think in order for him to succeed, he's going to need Welker to get hurt or not produce or just fall off the face of the earth. I don't think Welker, and ironically, it's because of the stereotypical media-driven, scrappy white guy who tries as hard as he can, so he's got to be a good locker room guy. Honestly, Wes Welker has done his fair share of bitching about playing time, throws his way, contracts, et cetera, et cetera. Not saying it's not all justified on his end, but he's not a guy that's easy to bench. And if Sanders gets the opportunity, I think you're right. I think he'll be good for that offense. He only averaged 11 yards a catch last year. So you're right. He's not explosive. He's not going to go down the field. But if he gets the opportunity, I think he could be a PPR maven and just catch 6 to 7 balls a game guaranteed and be as steady as you want for your wide receiver 2 or 3 position. But you're projecting a lot for him to get that opportunity, I think.
Sure. So right now we have him ranked 59th amongst receivers. That's, I think, way too low for a guy like that. And I think probably those rankings don't reflect his role there and whatever happens with Welker, like you said. So, yeah. All right. So on Denver, I think the other player we were going to cover was T.J. Ward, the safety who signed there from Cleveland. Definitely an upgrade on who they had in Duke Ahenecho. I think that's how you pronounce it. And look, Ward was very good in his own right. I mean, he's a very good run stopper. He's a very good tackler. He averaged over 100 tackles in the 2 years he was healthy with Cleveland. The problem is he's only been healthy half the time. So, it's sort of, I think, a risk for Denver and for IDPers to draft him because, look, if he's healthy, then great. I think you've got a real DB1 on your hands. But, there's a very good chance he doesn't stay healthy or doesn't last the season.
Not only that, but he's not a safety who's going to give you a lot of splash plays. He's not going to be roaming the field, just picking balls off. He's not going to be sacking the quarterback. Only 5 interceptions for his entire career, only 3.5 sacks for his entire career. Now, part of that, and this would be my ignorance, because why in the hell would you watch Cleveland Brown football? But maybe that's how the coaching staff in Cleveland used him. I don't know. Maybe he's going to have the opportunity to roam more and be more of an impact player, especially with Raheem Moore there, who can, despite the obvious blunder in the playoffs 2 years ago, he can cover. He can free him up to roam the field and sort of take on more of that Joker role you hear about in other defenses. But I would need to see it before I put faith in that. And until then, I wouldn't have him as a DB1. I'd have him if you need a filler for a defensive back at the back end of a draft and he's still there, I'm okay with that. That's fine. You could do worse, but I don't think he's a top 5, 7, or even 8 safety in the league when it comes to fantasy anyway.
Yeah, and DB1 may have been a little generous, but I'm still a fan. I think he's going to rack up a lot of tackles, and let's face it, in the AFC West, that's a gunslinger division. I mean, between San Diego and Oakland, who, even with your love of Maurice Jones-Drew, they're going to be behind a lot. They're going to be passing a lot, which means they're going to be chucking it. So I think Ward is in line to have a pretty good year. He's still young. He's still only 27. So personally, I would be okay with Ward as my first DB. Now, low-end DB1, but I certainly don't put him on par with an Earl Thomas or Eric Berry or anything like that. But do I think he's a guy that, at the very least will get a lot of tackles? Yeah, I think so. But to your point, if you're in a big play IDP league, no, he is definitely not your guy.
Correct.
But, if tackles are what you're after, then I think he's pretty good.
Agreed.
Well, good. So that wraps up the AFC West. I think probably challenges maybe the NFC North for least amount of impact players at the positional position. But that's okay. Yeah. That's okay. I think we still filled the time. So next time we will cover the AFC South and find out what we got there. So until next time.